Thank you, Joachim. So where shall I stand, here or? No, it's okay. So good morning to all of you, everybody. I'm really pleased to see you here. We were kind of calculating, saying, is it going to be 10 people, 20 people? I appreciate that you made the effort to turn up, and I would like to thank the organizers of this very interesting, actually, panel. I wanted to visit Europali exhibition, which unfortunately, unless I have high enough, very influential people to have the exhibition open for me. Okay, so I'm going to start using my slides, and I'm going to give you a kind of contextual reading of what architects and architectural practice in Turkey, the contextual, if you like, references, what kind of environment are these practices operating under today, in order to begin to think about the alternatives, where alternative visions can emerge from. Some of these I try to think in the article that I wrote for the magazine. Maybe I should use this. Right. It's better to stand here, actually. Istanbul, as you know, these pictures, I'm sure you know, but Istanbul is one of these cases, becoming one of these cases of what is called endless city, that now we live in Istanbul, but this is something of a new phenomenon that we don't have any concept of what this thing called city of Istanbul is. Just to give you a brief idea, the population of Istanbul, you can see how it increased from 1 million in 1950 to now 14 million. So every year we have 250,000 people being added to the urban population. And you can see that in 1990 the land use, so it's 87%. The growth rate of how the city is expanding. Okay. Right. So this is a very nice map going back to 1920s. Istanbul was, as you can see, started with a very kind of concentrated area in the historic. Nope. Sorry, it's going to take a bit of time. I'm just trying to find the red pointer. Okay. Yes, that's it. It's a bit faint, I think. So this is the center of Istanbul, and you can see how over the years all these different colors are showing how Istanbul has been expanding. These boundaries are now the new boundaries of the Istanbul city. And if I move, if you change the slide, just show me how you... Right, so this is, again, you see the new boundaries which was changed in 2004. The old boundaries of Istanbul used to be here. And now with the new boundaries of the city, we have all this green area, as you can see. This is the forest area of Istanbul, the northern frontier, if you like, which is the 47% still forest area, and all these white areas are agricultural areas. So Istanbul actually is quite unique in terms of how it is kind of embracing this kind of green zones, forest and agriculture, so closely intertwined with the embracing the city, and city, as you know, is still quite concentrated around the Bosphorus and along the stretch of the Marmara Sea. So this is the route of the third bridge, which we mapped for our 2012 Making City project as part of the Rotterdam Biennale. So what is happening since 2002? Really, Istanbul is now faced with huge, dramatic transformations which are driven by politics. So there is a political pressure on the city to perform a kind of a global city performance, but more a performance of economic growth through generating rent, what amounts to capital accumulation. So the city is being restructured, transformed, regenerated to become the basis for capital accumulation. And architecture is playing a role in this. This is what I'm actually talking about. So the next slide. So yes, this is a very nice picture showing how the political nature of the transformation of the city. The Prime Minister at that time, and this is a long quotation from Prime Minister who used to be the mayor of Istanbul, and now with the mayor becoming the Prime Minister and now the President, you know, the whole political hierarchy from the mayor to the central government is all aligned to put into practice. There's a kind of cohesion of political might, if you like, and vision to put into practice Istanbul as a global financial center. And this meeting actually was announcing Kanal Istanbul project, which you will see here. For the first time, the Prime Minister was saying, we have crazy projects for Istanbul. We are going to build a canal connecting the Marmara Sea to the Black Sea, and we have the third bridge, and we are going to have a new airport on the Black Sea coast and 2 new cities, each with 1 million population. So this was a political kind of push. Next one. So yes, this is the 2011, again, the central government's election pledge, where it was again stated that mega urban projects are the keys to this growing economy. So growth was, big economy, strong society. Growth is based on actually transforming, regenerating, turning Istanbul into a commercialized kind of real estate. Because very briefly in Istanbul, in Turkish cities, what we had small cities. Most of the population was rural, and in the 50s, this rural-urban rate changed. With migrations, people migrated very fast to cities and occupied treasury lands. But then these lands were occupied and they had a semi-legal status in terms of ownership. So they weren't quite privatized. They weren't quite under private ownership. So until the new millennium, in fact, the real estate was not a commercial property that people can easily think about selling on the marketplace. So with this globalization push and with the political push to legalize ownership patterns, i.e. giving people deeds, rights over their properties, or privatizing these occupied lands, that land became a commercial asset. This may sound a bit strange to you that it's in the new millennium that this is happening, that until then the city land was basically important for its use value, right? Not exchange value. The whole system was kind of structured around this notion of use value. Whereas with this Turkish economy opening up, globalizing, Istanbul becoming a global city, that the land had to become a commercial asset. And the way of doing that was actually expropriations, privatizations, i.e. taking a lot of the land from these occupiers, or allowing people their deeds. So this was a political calculations as to how much we allowed people ownership and how much of that you took under privatization orders. Okay, so what does it mean to become engine of growth? So crazy projects, these are all actually infrastructural projects. These are bridges, as I pointed out, Canal Istanbul, as you can see, and this is a kind of from the internet, an idea about the new city which is proposed at the exit of the Canal Istanbul. It's not clear where it's going to be. And if we go to that mega projects Istanbul, that link, you will see there's a very interesting now website run by a civil society organization, architecture organization. Can you go into it or not? Huh? You don't have internet access? Really? Right. Well, I was counting on that because you can see that every mega project is mapped on it. You can use your smartphones, and you can see that every project has a kind of identity card telling you, who is behind it, which government agency, and so forth. The important point is that none of these infrastructural projects, mega projects, are being funded by the state. Now, the difference between urban regeneration projects, mega urban transformation projects in Turkey versus in Europe, like Amsterdam, Thames Gateway, United States to some extent, is that public funding does not exist. There is no public funding. And in fact, politicians, Prime Minister is very, he says, well, we don't spend a single penny on these projects. Now, what does this mean? That, of course, then public politicians have to take the risk of these investors, have to promise something to the investors. With the bridge project, for instance, public sector promises so many cars will be passing through, it will be a toll bridge, so there will be so many cars passing, generating so much. We guarantee. How do you guarantee this? How do you guarantee that so many cars? Well, you say there's going to be 2 cities. Okay? So the infrastructure projects are actually connected with these massive urbanization. They have to be if you are not funding them. So 1 million city here, or wherever it's going to be, somewhere around here, maybe along the coast, is necessary, therefore, to fund this bridge. But also, of course, it's necessary because what you are doing is this is treasury land. What you are doing is basically generating huge profits, and these profits are turned into capital for the private sector. This turns back into the system through tax revenues, perhaps employment, turnover, and so forth. Next slide. So I put some more images. You can see how crazy these projects are. These are all kind of images that are circulating in media. In fact, we don't know. There is a kind of shroud of total, lack of information, lack of transparency. That whoever makes a proposal wins, kind of situation. If you take your proposal under your arm and visit the Prime Minister's office regularly, then maybe this will stick. So, and what you see happening is, of course, that these projects are right at the heart of the green kind of breathing northern zone of Istanbul, which the master plan of the city says that it should not be touched. So there is now a kind of tension between the local authority who had said with the, all the urban planning community of Istanbul, who had decided and put it into their plans that this northern zone is going to be left alone, because that's our ecological belt, if you like, and that the new airport should be somewhere here, and the densification of urbanization should be happening already where there is urbanization. So that whole project is now being dismantled, that plan decision is being dismantled, because it's easier to actually extract rent in empty, unurbanized spaces, because there's no reaction from the public. Actually, this whole mega urban projects are a shift in the paradigm in Turkey in terms of architectural practice. This picture is very nice because it shows you these buildings are product of the 1970s, what we called yapsat, build and sell, which were generated by individual constructors, individual owners of buildings. Each apartment found a small capital base, and they basically constructed their own apartments, and the constructing company just had probably 1/3 of the whole value of this apartment. So everybody did this. The whole of Istanbul is like this, if you have visited Istanbul. This is the yapsat model, and what you see behind is how this has all been replaced by corporate, large-scale companies who are actually more and more have the ability to plan these areas in conjunction with state authorities. So there are there's very strong state housing association with planning rights and power to plan these areas, and then they contract it out to private companies to come and implement these plans. So what you have is that the value of these properties per square meters are rising, so the profitability is actually increasing, which means that it is these large companies who are benefiting from this process. Okay, so, and what is the role in terms of, who is driving this process? Obviously, Turkey is a country where savings, so capital accumulation through savings have been very low. So finance has to be raised from other sources. So what we saw actually is that Istanbul Metropolitan Municipality back in 2006 had this brilliant idea to start transforming the city through the Zaha Hadid and Kanyang projects, one in Kartal in one end of the city and in two extreme ends of the city. These were very symbolic. The idea was that they would generate the overall transformation of Istanbul. Huge projects, as you can see. But then these projects were not realized because there was no ability to raise funding. Because, as I said, public sector is not funding these projects, and there was no funding available. So what then happened was that there was another project, which, this is the Zaha Hadid proposal, huge, massive, as you can see, and it required the whole kind of destruction of an existing neighborhood of industrial site. Okay. So then what happened, which was implemented, which it actually set the whole tone of transformation of Istanbul, was the privatization of a very central location in Istanbul, which belonged to the National Highways Authority, and it was sold for a very high amount of money, as you can see, and so to build, this was a public area which was privatized. The planning regulations were changed to incorporate new functions like tourism, corporate kind of headquarters, entertainment, culture, and so forth. So how is it that this property found a bidder? How was it? Because again, public sector was saying there's no money. So how did this happen? Well, another example, I found figures for Sapphire, which is a similar situation, tallest tower block. So what happens is that there is building regulations, calculations as to what is allowed. You have a 12,000 square meter plot and 2.5 times building rights. So what happens is that your mathematics don't add up. Somehow you end up with 30,000 square meters of construction, 165,000, you see. So you end up with a much, in terms of the building scale, much bigger construction. The way this happens is that the planning rules, the planning decisions are kind of adjusted to incorporate this for-profit operation. So if you imagine that these are 10,000 euros per square meter, the Sapphire building was about 1 billion euros in profit. So this is how the real estate developments are being funded. So this is the Sapphire Tower, this is the Zorlu Center, which is this National Highways Authority privatization. These were actually very important symbolic kind of moments when the state showed how it's going to go about privatizing and transforming urban space in Istanbul. These are public lands, privatized, and rents being extracted, which feeds into capital accumulation. These companies are the companies who are then going to building of the third bridge, building of the airport. So where does the capital come from? It comes from the way the rent is being accrued through these planning rights improvisations, if you like, and gaining these surplus values through this playing around with urban sort of central district properties. So, therefore, what I'm saying is that the real estate rent now is the basis of capital accumulation. And as long as there are people who are paying 10,000 euros per square meter in Istanbul, this is the important point, then this equation is working. As long as we have demand, then this equation is working, that there are investors, and there is this rent increase possible. So what happens? Capital accumulation, economic growth, of course. Then there are the projecting an image of modernizing global city. Everybody loves these Zorlu centers and these new buildings. There doesn't seem to be a huge public outcry. The public outcry comes from actually the professional associations like urban planners and so forth. So the third point that needs to make is an identity claim. So there is the modern city image being projected with these projects, but I'll come to how there's also an issue about the identity claim of the existing political party, that they want to project their own identity into urban space. So, so I call this a wrecking ball. A wrecking ball is being assembled in order to put into effect this expropriation of the public land, public what belongs to the public. So what constitutes this wrecking ball? What are the new tools? So these are very, I think that these are key in terms of understanding how architecture practice is operating under. So we have very powerful central state organizations like Mass Housing Association with planning rights. They are executive authorities. They are not parliamentarian. They don't belong to the parliament. So this is a very important point. There is a centralization to planning. There is fragmentation of planning. There are a number of these executive central authorities, like Tourism Minister has one, Privatization Office has one, Ministry of Urbanization and Environment has one, Housing has one. They all come with their plans and executions. So what happens is that the planning process is fragmented. You have very powerful executive public authorities facing you, and these are not transparent, open to negotiation. Therefore, these are not part of a democratic deliberation process. They are part of the government deciding we are going to do these and creating these very powerful. So this is the Saskia Sassen point about how in this global kind of environment that the power is shifting to the executive authority, undermining the parliament, the deliberative mechanism, which is the parliament. So these are not debated, negotiated in kind of these parliamentary situations. And plus, in Turkey, because there is no public funding behind these projects, the public cannot therefore get up and say, well, I'm funding you and therefore I expect public interest out of this project. So the actually public sector doesn't go in with a public interest in mind. The public interest in mind is about actually making Istanbul a globalizing city, a rent capital accumulation city, a city that generates economic growth. That's it. So this is trickle-down economics, basically. It's just totally neoliberal, trickle-down, things will come down eventually. So new legislations to make these privatizations, expropriations possible, and also increasing the size of Istanbul, which I pointed in 2004, had a meaning. When you make your city larger, you have a huge playing ground to make these operations possible. So just very briefly, the images of how actually these different laws that have been invented, have been devised in Turkey. The historic sites are being now subject to transformation. This is a very famous Sulukule district. Within the city walls of Istanbul, this whole neighborhood has been totally destroyed and transformed into middle-class, kind of high-value residential area. This is Tarlabaşı. This is a picture actually coming. This is the company which image showing how the existing what they call disorder is going to be turned into order. This is, reminds you of this Richard Sennett, the uses of disorder. No, this is all about, order. So this actually is taking us to this idea of the image that one is being projected onto Istanbul. What is the image? The image of order, middle class gentrification, and of course, in terms of the kind of aesthetic architectural style, this is very much a kind of global gentrifier's image. So another law which allowed, this is from Ankara, rather an old picture. This doesn't exist anymore actually. This is all being transformed. And these are real pictures, by the way. They look unreal, but they are real. Now you don't know what is real and what is an architectural drawing. So all that squatter settlements have been cleared, and these are the results of the Mass Housing Association. Another one, this is from Istanbul. This area used to be covered in squatter settlements. Again, Mass Housing Association, urban transformation area. That was what Mayor of Istanbul was saying, this twisted urbanization needs to be changed. This is real. You know, I was thinking, is this the real picture? So this is the, well, for us, it's our famous, all over my world, Europe. Yeah. Europe? Please note that. Why does he? This is another, this is not real. This is the project drawings, but this stadium is already happened. The highways, you can see how these real estate projects are happening. That map, which we couldn't link into the website, Mega Projects Istanbul, actually shows one by one where these projects are. Okay, so I need to now, do I have to, okay, so these are, of course, Mass Housing Association has a public mission to provide affordable housing. This is an example from affordable housing in a district in Istanbul. This is Bosphorus city in Istanbul, so you can see, you know, many examples. So now this is another instance of how this is the area that we worked as part of this Rotterdam Architecture Biennale. We were working in this district, and this was a case study which you will actually hear about in the video presentation that Joachim will show. So this area, which is the water reservoir area of Istanbul, two reservoir areas actually have been these were treasury lands, but the municipality was actually administering these lands. They've been taken over by Ankara, the central authority, one of the ministries, took over this whole land, and this is where the Canal Istanbul is going to go through, and there's the airport project being happening here, and actually this picture comes from a blogger, activist Yaşar Adanalı, who somehow got hold of this image because this belongs to the Olympic Games promotional campaign of the central government, showing you how, you know, as if we feel proud that we have access to these huge lands that we can very easily develop. Okay, so yes, so what's happening is that as the city boundaries have grown, this is the area, by the way, which was marked in the previous picture, is that Istanbul lost all its villages. We had lots of villages. You can see these small dots were all villages actually. They have lost their village status, and though the 23% of rural land of Istanbul has now become an urban real estate. So you can say that, my God, you know, Istanbul is like a roller, with the you know, this machine that is next to Europe, where this is all going to be urbanized, clearly. And these are, I mean, the previous one, these are standardization projects for rural buildings. This is how architecture, I'm sorry, you know, this is how architecture is working. Architects are working, not architecture. Standardization, massification, economies of scale, unification, and of course there's identity behind this. All these are kind of promoted because they are kind of vernacular Turkish architectural aesthetics or architectural style. So there's an identity politics behind it about Turkishness or Ottomanness. That the complexity of cultural identity of Anatolia is erased in all these kind of unification projects. These are new gentrified villas from Istanbul, all carrying Ottoman names. And I don't know, I mean, architects would know better. They claim to be Ottoman inspired in architecture. And yes, the projection, the global image, we know that, I talked about it. So the global image is now coexisting side by side with this kind of neo-Ottomanism. That the government is now beginning to say, well, okay, we are a global city, we are generating huge rents and capital accumulation, we are a powerhouse at the gate of Europe, yes, but how about our identity, our uniqueness? So this is the time, in the third kind of period of the government, when the government is feeling strong that these identity claims are coming on board through, interestingly, spectacles, you know, urban festivals like these ones, TV soaps. So this is very much kind of a media, almost like a media campaign of how these images are infiltrating into our everyday kind of practice. And of course through architecture. This is a scene from one of the museums next to the city walls, the Panorama Museum depicting the conquest of Constantinople. And this is the Üsküdar Monumental Mosque, which is actually, this is just a render as you can see, but this is now real, the construction is underway. How can we communicate our beliefs and civilizational codes to the modern world today? So this is the kind of a good, one of the key, I think, architectural sentences in Istanbul. If you look for it, you know, where is this identity? How is this identity being expressed? Well, this mosque clearly is one of these key moments. So the second moment was actually, which then blew up, as you know, was actually the government wanted, if we come to the next slide, next slide. So this is the Gezi Park, and those who went to know Istanbul, this is the existing Gezi Park in the middle of Istanbul, a very symbolic kind of Republican site designed by Prost, Henry Prost, as a kind of one of the only public space of Istanbul in a kind of modern sense. And the government said, well, this is not functioning very well, this park is full of drunk people, and so that we need to regenerate this area. We also want to take the traffic under, there is congestion. So if we go back the slides, so one more. So this is the entrance of the old military barracks from the Ottoman days, and one more back. So this is the military barracks. Before it was demolished, this whole area was demolished, and then the park was constructed as a kind of modernizing of this whole city environment. So government said, we want to construct these military barracks, but just architecturally we want to imitate this. And this was a very interesting paradoxical situation that it was done because they were built in the Ottoman era, but in terms of its architectural language, this was very kind of influenced by Russian influences, So to call it Ottoman clearly needed deciphering, you know. So very interesting facade, you know, approaching to this aesthetic issues from a very superficial, abstract, the way it looks as an image. So this idea of identity is on the level of the two-dimensional image of how it looks. So we can go forward now. Next one. Yes, so this is the famous municipal depiction of the Gezi Park transformation project. And then, of course, what happened was that this project was going ahead, in a way making transparent how all these privatization processes have been going on in Istanbul until that moment. How the planning regulations have been bent, how these authorities are behaving in such kind of top-down manner. All these processes which have been going on in Istanbul became very clear, evident, transparent with this Gezi Park project. And then people said, yes, that's enough. I mean, we've been sitting with it all this time. This is our public land. This is the public space. This is the symbolic public space now, which says something about the public nature of the city that we want to embrace. So therefore, as you then know, this whole park was occupied for 15 days, and you know, everybody, the whole public who were camping, demonstrating, doing all kinds of alternative kind of articulations of how life should be from a public point of view, was the probably kind of space, moment, time, event, media, that articulations of alternative publicness were being thought through. But then what happened was the occupation was ended violently. Many deaths happened, and so the whole site was forcefully evacuated, and the pedestrianization project went ahead. So there are now two of these. And the whole area has become totally covered, identityless place, waiting. In fact, it's a kind of transition, waiting to be, waiting for political power to come again and do what they intended to do. Yes, so these are images. This is an image of. Comes from a book which said, well, what would it be like if the old military barracks were rebuilt? So, okay. So top-down, yes, I talked about top-down. So now for architects, you see, for architectural practice, as these projects are getting bigger and bigger, what's happening is that at global in scale, for instance, this airport project, they come with their own architectural practices, global architectural stars. So how is this feeding the local, if you like, architectural practice? Are there, dialogue? Is there a dialogue between the global, powerful, super architectural offices? There are some Turkish offices involved in some of them, but the whole process is driven by this kind of logic of global players. So architects are now working against these very powerful executive, centralized authorities. So they're bargaining, the grounds for bargaining, the grounds for negotiation. Where does architectural innovation come from? So this is the question that I was asking in the beginning of my essay, and also here. Where does it So it seems that architects are trying, when they deal with these big private property developers like the Sapphire building, the Zorlu, that they are having to invent ways of maximizing profits. And this is not a ground for innovation. So where is innovation going to come from? So in my opinion, we need these public situations of negotiation. And one of the sources of negotiation in Istanbul is indeed coming from poor districts with semi-legal property ownership structures. These are the areas which are inner city areas. They have semi-legal property deeds rights. They are poor, but the governments are trying to transform them, regenerate them. But they are like 100,000 people living. Ok Meydanı, Fikirtepe, these are big districts. 100,000 population. So there is, this is a moment when the government politics says, well, I cannot take these 100,000 people against me. I have to talk to them. So this is the moment when architects are having to step outside their architectural practice and sit on this position of becoming mediators. And what we find is that architects in Turkey are very unprepared to do this mediating task. This is not design, this is mediation. So how can architects mediate between, you understand what the dynamics ingredients are. So how can architects become these mediators of between people, these property relations and powerful state organizations? If architects learn to mediate, this is my final sentence, then I think the architectural innovation is going to follow suit. So, thank you very much.
Maybe one question then in the meantime. You were involved in this project which you mentioned in the biennial, which was a lot about, and what was to a certain extent an attempt to mediation. Where does that fail? Because to a certain extent it's a popular project, and you said just before we started this debate, but at the same time it doesn't have its effects, or it doesn't lead to a kind of joint development.
Well, I mean, when you show the film, I think it's going to become clearer. Gregor hasn't arrived, so there's going to be a 10-minute film which shows how the Making City Biennale project progressed, but it was the water reservoir area which I showed. If you remember that big red marked area in the northern part of Istanbul, the water reservoir area was our test case for this Biennale project. And there, yes, we as a Biennale team constructed an atelier and an alliance where we invited all the stakeholders to come together to look together at this protection of the water reservoir area and combining it with urban development. So how can there be urbanization coexisting with water reservoir protection? And we discovered that as we were talking across these different stakeholders, architects, planners, water, Ankara, everybody, we discovered that actually this is a key paradigm for Istanbul's urban the key dynamic. That if you manage water well in Istanbul, you inform how urbanization can happen. So we were generating knowledge, we were making certain knowledge which are fragmented in different authorities. We put that together and we made it transparent, and we were able to generate a holistic picture. So when you do negotiations with over different stakeholders, you make knowledge transparent and negotiable. This is what we did. We will come to how it felt.